Over to you,
Okay.
Donna.
Thanks everyone, and thanks for having us. As Lou said, we're here today to just talk about our implementation of CIP 3-9 and just one way of doing it. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we embarked on our CIP 3-9 project in May of 2024, realizing that the compliance date is April 1 of 26. Typically, what we do at FirstEnergy is we back that up by 2 months, which is, February 1st of 26. And we always build in for some of the new standards. We've had a lot of success having the RF assist visits. It's been very helpful for us when new standards come along, just as another pulse point to make sure that what we're doing is in line with, generally in line with what the requirements are, and get the thoughts and bounce that off of RF. So we had planned to do that as part of the project. So you can see that that was also built in. So we started in May of 2024, and we wanted to have 2 phases. One was our technical assessment. And the technical assessment was really, if you look on the right there, what is CIP 3-9? Well, that's all about vendor electronic remote access security controls to the low impact BES cyber systems. So, the first thing we wanted to do in our technical assessment was identify, where do we have that connectivity? And then phase 2 was, the implementation of any gaps that we might have, and documentation and the controls. And if you look at 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3 there on the right, just as a reminder, the requirements are you have to have a method for determining your, low impact BES cyber systems vendor electronic remote access. Then, once you determine that, you need to have a method to disable that access when needed. And you have to have a method for detecting any known or suspected inbound and outbound malicious, communication for that access. So those are the requirements, and we broke our project up into 2 phases. And then we recently did have our RF assist visit a couple of weeks ago to kind of checkpoint our methodology here. But if we start off, you can see we have a conclusion here already, but we're going to give everybody our conclusion and then kind of back our way into how we came to that conclusion. But just to kind of start off with that, the conclusion that we had was, FirstEnergy does not permit this type of remote access, vendor initiated remote access. So all of our access is controlled through the FirstEnergy standard policies and procedures for under CIP 4, which basically means each individual user is given a unique user ID and access privileges, and has the background checks and the CIP training. So other than that, we don't allow anything else. And there's sort of 2 types of vendor remote access. One is the user-based and the system-to-system, and we're going to get into that. Jason's going to kind of get into that on the next slide. If we did have any of that access in the future, if for some reason we decided not to kind of go by this, then, we also have procedures for 6.2 and 6.3. And we'll get into all those details next. So I'll turn it over to Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Yeah, so there's a couple of foundational items that build on the technical implementation items that Grant's going to cover here in a few minutes. The first is that we wanted to pull out our technical rationale definition on vendor. We actually define, I believe it's up to 9 classes. I should have looked right before this now. I believe we have 9 different classes of vendors that cover everything from OEMs to integrators to the mix and everything in between. One of the things, though, that we've definitely made a distinction with here is that we don't consider a provider of staff augmentation labor as a contractor or a vendor under CIP. So from our perspective, anybody who is coming in and doing labor on any of our covered assets especially, but this is really a corporate-wide situation, each one of those people has to have an individual account that is controlled through our identity management service. So when we talk about a vendor is any combination of a distributor, an integrator, and OEM but specifically omits the labor type function for contingent labor. And that would even include things such as if we're bringing in a contractor to help with a tech support issue, or even having them on standby, we do require all of them to have and maintain individual accounts. So then obviously vendor remote access becomes when an external party that's providing service under one of the procurement contracts, we track that separately. So there's three classes of people who could have accounts. But the important point that underlies all of this is that we in fact track them. So in our system, each person has their own user account, and just as important, each user account is associated with the provider of that labor if it is not an employee. So a contractor account, we can go back and say, okay, this particular account lines up with, pick a vendor. So we know in advance where all of those vendors are, and they're not uncontrolled. So in like the FERC order is talking about where the vendor is controlling and that gating the access. We don't have situations like that by definition in how we address this topic at the foundational level. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions. If not, then I'll turn it over to Grant and let him talk through some of the technical details. I will take that as no questions, and so I'll turn it over to Grant.
Thanks, Jason. Follow up on what Jason had to say about how we do classify vendor. Still, we did make an initiative to make sure that everything Jason said was true, as far as there weren't any other way that vendors were getting access to any of our information. And we had 4 categories which we knew were available in our company. We needed to look at a little closer. One was the dial-up access that we looked at. FirstEnergy historically has had dial-up access to some substation relays access. Maybe some vendors had access to that, or maybe not. But we did determine as part of this process that the dial-up access was really being replaced pretty fastly as our high-speed connectivity ramped out to these stations, and we were almost had very few dial-up access points left, and we did remove all of those. There was actually less than 10 left, so we did remove the dial-up access from those sites, and also made it as part of the policy we wouldn't add any more. So we did remove any dial-up access, and that's the historical dial-up through a modem going through a SCADA point that somebody enables. So we did have controls over that, but we did get rid of all the dial-up access. The next thing we looked at was what replaced that. We do have jump hosts that under our CIP-5 program that people use to access those relays now, and we did verify that all those folks have individual user accounts on those, and they follow all the procedures and processes that Jason just talked about. We really treat those folks as employees, so those don't follow under vendors in our program as far as this SIP procedure goes. So that was kind of nice and neat the way we had packaged that up already. So we use the same system for our mediums and lows. And for the power system equipment, we did have to take a little close look at that. We do have some breakers out there that we have some we have some warranty services on these, and vendors do have access to some data comes out of those systems. But we did verify that we do have data diodes on those systems where the data is just flowing one way, and the way the data diode is set up, it's not an access point. There is no way there's not a transmit pair going into the device. It's really just heading out. So these devices aren't part of best cyber systems because they only provide information going out to vendors. They're not used for for really operating the system. They're just really for vendor purposes. So we went through those systems and re-verified that there wasn't any access there. And that left us with our generation and our network connectivity. We don't have a lot of generation, so it was pretty easy for us to take a look at those firewall rules protecting those plants, making sure that there wasn't any access to anything outside, that would classify as a vendor connection. And the same thing with our network device management. Those follow the same SIP-4 processes that Jason talked about. So we did look at the areas that we knew we thought we ought to take a closer look at. This is the buckets they fell into, and once we finished this assessment, we determined we didn't have any vendor remote access compared to our definition. I think the next slide, Donna, maybe you were going to cover, or you want me to cover that one as well?
Yeah, I can cover it. So thank you, Grant. So that was pretty much our phase 1 technical assessment. And then just to follow up, we said, for phase 2, we had, our documentation piece. And this is our methodology that, to kind of keep this in check as we go forward. So the first one, in our methodology is identify our leaps. Basically we have all those identified, and looking at those leaps, review the connectivity, similar to what Grant just talked about. We're going to routinely do this. And then, review the term. Once we review the connectivity, then we're going to, go back to the definitions that Jason discussed, reviewing our definition of the LRAC and the vendor electronic remote access. And, at the end of the day, then it would pop out, identify any vendor electronic remote access, which, as we said, right now we don't have any. But, we did walk downs. We have change control on those walk downs. We identify, routinely identify any modifications to this SIP environment. And then we have an annual basis of compliance, which, we'll sign off on this every year that nothing has changed, along with, checking during our change control processes. So Lou, that kind of brings us to the end of our presentation, and we'll just open it up for any questions that anybody might have. I was looking in the Slido and I didn't see any yet.
We're watching Slido. Let's see if we have questions come in. Let's give it a few seconds.
Sure.
Courtney and Gabe, I don't see the Slido window because I'm presenter.
One just got pushed through, Lou.
I see a question that came through. How does this apply to organizations like PJM who remotely have direct generation control through the AGC signals? Grant, I don't know if you can take that one.
Yeah, right now, our plants, they don't get direct control from PJM, so through the remote AGC signals. So that's something we didn't have to consider. That's a good question, though. I'm not sure that how we would fit that into our vendor definition. But right now, we don't take direct AGC signals from PJM for those plants. Good question, though.
Okay,
And,
Lou. Go ahead, Grant.
The question was LEAP retired. Yeah, we made some internal definitions for some of these terms that just kind of fit with how we were originally starting our program. But LEAP, that's our low impact electronic access point. That's what we call them internally. Although it's not a NERC standard term anymore. We do have internal definitions for those, just for convenience sake, I guess. Good question.
Okay, Gabe, any other questions in Slido?
I'm not seeing any right now.
Okay, well, thank you, Donna, Jason, Grant.
Sure, thank you for having us.
Appreciate your presentation.